The mountain wind howled like a wounded wolf that evening, pushing clouds low across the timberline. Elias Gage had lived alone up there for 15 winters, and each one had chipped away another layer of whatever softness he once had. His cabin stood on the edge of the cliff where the valley opened wide, a rough-hewn shelter of logs and silence. People in town called him the mountain ghost, a man who came down only when the supplies ran dry or the rifle needed new powder. He didn't argue the name. Solitude was easier than pity. When Elias came to the trading post that day, he expected nothing more than flour, salt, and maybe a new axe head. But life has a way of setting snares for even the most careful hunter. He was tying his mule when he heard voices behind the barn, angry, sharp, and desperate. A woman's voice first, dripping venom, then a man's, low and pleading. He almost ignored it, until the word, sold, snapped the air like a whip. He turned the corner. A wagon sat there, battered and gray. Beside it, a heavy woman with thin lips was arguing with the postmaster. In the wagon sat a girl, small, maybe 17, her face pale beneath tangled hair. Her eyes darted like trapped birds, and her hands trembled on her lap. She didn't speak, didn't even look at anyone, just stared at the dirt. She can't hear a thing. The woman barked. Worthless, that's what she is. Eats more than she's worth, and I got no use for her. Elias froze. The woman's words were acid, but the girl's silence was worse. Something in her face, something cracked and yet unbroken, caught him harder than a bullet. The postmaster tried to calm the woman, but she kept shouting. If somebody wants her, take her. I'll sell her cheap. Deaf as a rock and slower than winter thaw. Elias didn't plan to speak, but the words came anyway. How much? The woman spun, eyes narrowing. What's it to you? He looked at the girl again. Her dress was torn, her bare feet caked with mud. Her hands gripped a small wooden carving, an old bird, worn smooth. She couldn't hear, the woman had said, but her eyes told stories her lips never would. I asked how much, he repeated. The woman sniffed, half sneer, half surprise. $5 and she's yours. She's deaf, dumb, and probably cursed. You'll regret it. Elias reached into his coat and dropped the coins into her hand. I'll take her. The postmaster stepped forward. Elias, you can't just. I said I'll take her, he cut in, his tone a wall of iron. The woman snatched the money, muttered something about fools and burdens, and climbed into her wagon. She didn't even glance back. The girl stood frozen, eyes wide as if she'd been left in a strange world. When the wagon rattled away, silence fell heavy between them. Elias nodded toward his mule. Come on, then. She didn't move. He sighed, gestured again, and this time she followed, hesitant steps crunching in the snow. When he lifted her onto the mule, she flinched, as though expecting pain. He said nothing. The mountain didn't need words, and neither did he. They reached his cabin by nightfall. The fire had long died, so he stoked the coals, added wood, and gestured for her to sit. She obeyed quietly, curling near the warmth like a stray pup afraid of its own shadow. He cooked beans and bread, sliding a plate toward her. She hesitated before eating, small, careful bites as though every chew might cost her something. He watched, not with pity but with curiosity. Deaf, the woman had said, but those eyes weren't lost. They were listening, somehow. After supper, he pointed to the bed by the hearth. You sleep there. I'll take the chair. She shook her head fast, gesturing that she'd take the floor. He frowned, then gave a slow nod. No use arguing. She curled near the fire, clutching that wooden bird. The flames threw gold across her face, softening the bruises he hadn't noticed before. He lay awake long after, staring at the rafters, hearing the wind beat against the door. He hadn't meant to buy anyone, but something about her, something buried deep, had woken a part of him he thought long dead. Morning came with fog and frost. Elias set to chopping wood, the rhythm of the axe his only music. When he turned back, the girl stood at the window, watching. She smiled faintly, then, noticing him, dropped her gaze and turned away. Over the next days, she moved like a ghost through the cabin, cleaning, cooking, tending the fire. She never spoke, but when Elias tripped once on the doorstep and muttered a curse under his breath, he could have sworn her head turned, just slightly, before she caught herself. He tested it again, whispered words when her back was turned. Each time, a flicker of reaction, quick as lightning. Deaf, maybe, but something didn't fit. One evening, as dusk painted the snow blue, he sat carving wood beside the fire. She came closer, watching his hands. He offered her a piece and the knife. She hesitated, then knelt beside him. The first cuts were shaky, clumsy. He reached out, guiding her grip. Her breath caught. When their eyes met, something silent passed between them, something not even words could hold. Days turned into weeks. She began to smile more, her movements less afraid. She'd hum softly when she thought he was outside, a strange, haunting melody no deaf girl should know. And one morning, when the wolves howled close to the cabin, she whispered, not mouthed, whispered, a prayer under her breath. Elias heard it clear as daylight. He didn't confront her right away. Instead, he waited, watching, piecing together the story she hid behind her quiet eyes. It was spring when the truth finally broke. A peddler came riding up the mountain, carrying supplies and gossip. Over a cup of coffee, he mentioned a woman in town bragging about selling off her husband's daughter to some hermit fool. Said the girl was no more deaf than you or me. Played dumb to survive that witch of a stepmother. Elias froze. The cup trembled in his hand. When the peddler left, he turned to find her standing in the doorway, pale as snow, eyes full of fear. She'd heard every word. You can hear, he said quietly. She didn't deny it, just lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. Please don't send me back. He stood there for a long moment, looking at her, this fragile, fierce little bird who had fooled the world to stay alive. Then he set his jaw. I won't, she sobbed, covering her face. He stepped closer, resting a rough, calloused hand on her shoulder. You don't owe me silence anymore, he said. Not here. She looked up, eyes wide with something like hope. You're not angry. Elias shook his head. You did what you had to do. And maybe, he paused, voice rough, maybe I needed someone who could still hear, even when I couldn't speak. Outside, the wind softened, as if the mountains themselves had been listening all along. Spring lingered on the mountain longer that year, as if the world itself didn't want to wake from its fragile peace. The snow had melted into silver ribbons of water that trickled past the cabin, and the forest floor was alive with the scent of pine and earth. For Elias and the girl, whose name he now knew was Clara, each day settled into a rhythm that felt almost like grace. He had built her a small garden behind the cabin, fenced with old timbers, where she spent her mornings planting herbs and wildflowers. She hummed softly while she worked, unaware that he often paused his chopping to listen. Her voice, thin at first, grew stronger each day, a sound that carried through the pines and softened the old scars in his chest. Elias had known loneliness like a second skin. He'd buried his wife 12 years ago, and the child she carried along with her. After that, the world had gone quiet, too quiet. But now the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. One evening, as the sun sank behind the peaks, Clara sat by the fire carving wood as he had taught her. The little bird she shaped looked almost alive. When she finished, she smiled shyly and held it out. For you, she said. Elias turned it in his hand, the firelight flickering across the delicate lines. That's fine work, he murmured. Better than my first dozen. Her smile widened. You're a patient teacher. Not by nature, he admitted. Guess some folks are worth learning patience for. Color rose to her cheeks, and she looked away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was tender, like two hearts listening to the same unspoken song. But peace on the mountain never lasted forever. A week later, riders came. Elias saw them first from the ridge. 2 men on horses and a wagon behind them. He recognized the woman driving it even before she shouted. The stepmother. She'd come back. By the time they reached the cabin, Elias was already standing in the doorway, rifle slung across his arm. The woman climbed down, her mouth twisted in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thought I'd check on my property, she sneered. Word in town says you've been keeping her real cozy up here. She's not property, Elias said evenly. And she's not yours. The men flanking her shifted uneasily. Now, mister, one drawled, the lady says that girl was stolen. Sold. Elias cut in. You were there. She sold her. The woman's eyes gleamed. $5 don't buy a soul, mountain man. That girl's my late husband's blood, and she's coming with me. Inside the cabin, Clara trembled. She could hear every word, every cruel edge in the woman's tone. Memories crashed through her, the nights of hunger, the beatings, the whispered prayers for deafness to be real. She stepped into the doorway, voice shaking but clear. I'm not going, she said. The woman laughed harshly. You think you have a choice. You little liar. Elias moved forward, placing himself between them. You heard her. She's staying. The woman's smile vanished. You'd fight the law over some lying brat. I'd fight the devil himself, he said. For a moment, no one breathed. Then one of the men reached for his revolver. The sound that followed was pure thunder. The crack of Elias's rifle echoed through the valley. The bullet struck the dirt between the man's boots, throwing up dust. Next one's higher, he warned. The man froze. Even the stepmother flinched. She looked from Elias's hard eyes to Clara's steady gaze and seemed to see, for the first time, that she'd lost more than a bargain. This ain't over, she hissed, scrambling into the wagon. You'll regret crossing me. The wheels turned, splashing through the melting snow. They rode away into the dark. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, a rush of protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. Clara ran to him, tears cutting trails through the soot on her cheeks. I thought she'd take me, she whispered. Not while I breathe, he said. She looked up at him, eyes shining. Why do you care so much? You don't even know me. He hesitated, searching for the truth. Because I do know you. I know what it's like to lose everything and keep walking. I know what silence feels like when it's not peace but punishment. You remind me that life still speaks, if you listen hard enough. She smiled through her tears. Then I'll never be silent again. From that day forward, Clara changed. The fear in her eyes melted into determination. She learned to ride, to hunt, to laugh without looking over her shoulder. She and Elias rebuilt the cabin together, added a porch where they'd sit at sunset. He'd tell her stories of the mountains, of the wife he'd loved, and the ghosts that sometimes visited in his dreams. Summer came, blazing and bright. One afternoon, while gathering berries near the creek, Clara slipped and twisted her ankle. Elias carried her back, cursing softly under his breath, but she just laughed, clutching his neck. You'll hurt your back, she teased. It's been bent before, he grumbled, but his heart was light. That night, as she rested by the fire, he realized how much the cabin had changed since she arrived. Flowers dried on the windowsill. Music drifted from her lips. The place felt alive again, and so did he. But even joy casts a long shadow. Late in the summer, word reached them that the stepmother had died suddenly, her house consumed by fire. No one knew how it started. Clara said nothing, only whispered a prayer for peace, perhaps for the woman, perhaps for herself. In the quiet that followed, Elias finally spoke the words he'd held for months. You could go, you know. Start fresh somewhere down in the valley. You're free now. She looked at him a long while, then smiled softly. I was free the moment you heard me. He blinked, not understanding. She touched his hand. You listened when everyone else turned away. That's what freedom sounds like.